Welcome back to FallingFoxGaming, everybody. I am your host Blaine, and today we're continuing with part 2 of our Kenshi 2022 series, Rise of the Skeletons. Upon leaving the bar and heading out of town, K4 and 3 was stopped by a skeleton that refused to identify themselves. They were clearly an old model that had several battle damage marks. They told K4 and 3 that if he truly wanted answers about the past and what had happened, the best place to look is the scrap house. Just to the east of town is a large structure, an old factory, ran by Quinn and his partner Dak. They have more information on the old world than just about anyone else. Be warned, as the information will not be free. It may not cost you cats, but it will not be free. With that, the skeleton left, leaving K4 and 3 in the rain with his thoughts. And so he decided to head to the scrap house and learn what information he could. Calling this structure a factory is an insult, he thought to himself. He had seen these buildings in their prime, and they were far more imposing, far more intimidating. If this is the best this world has to offer, perhaps it's changed even more than he thought. Introducing himself to Quinn, he barely had a chance to speak before the eccentric skeleton began to ramble about his wares. Large stockpiles of weapons, armor, artifacts, AI cores, ancient research books. Anything one could desire could be found here. It's odd. How do you explain to somebody that he had seen legions of skeletons armed with the best armor and weapons? What he's showing him now could hardly compete. Still, he did not want to be rude. He introduced himself as K4 and 3 and explained his situation. Quinn was quite interested in this information. It seems as though K4 and 3 is not the only skeleton to have awakened recently, but that is information for a different time. Clearly K4 and 3 was here for something else. He's here for some answers. Quinn, of course, was happy to give him those answers, but he would need something in return. While Quinn and Dak could handle the shop by themselves quite easily, there were a few things that they needed from outsiders. To the northeast, a town called Heng acts as a trading capital for the United Cities. It's the perfect opportunity for K4 and 3 to get out into the world and see what's out there. At the same time, Quinn has a shipment that has been late for quite some time now, and he needs it delivered. If K4 and 3 is willing to travel up there and bring the shipment back, he'd be happy to answer as many questions as K4 and 3 could ask, as long as the questions are reasonable. K4 and 3 is not in a position to decline this offer. He needs some answers, and this seems like a reasonable request. Based on the directions Quinn gave, the trip shouldn't take too long, and so he accepts the offer. Before heading out, K4 and 3 decides to ask a couple of the local skeletons about some things he should watch out for on the road. They all mention the same general information. Watch out for the Holy Nation and avoid them if possible. Don't cross the United Cities Guard, and keep your cats close. K4 and 3 decides it's time to head out. He thanks everyone for their information that they have given, and says that he will return shortly with the shipment. On his way out of town, K4 and 3 pauses for a moment to take a look back. All he can see is a couple of lights flickering in the darkness. It's quite fitting, he thought. There was once a great empire here, and the skeletons were a part of that. Now all that remains is a couple of lights flickering in the darkness. Perhaps it's time someone turns on the lights. Just outside of town, K4 and 3 walk through the ruins of an old structure. The remnants of the old empire, and he can only imagine how long they've been sitting here. It breaks his mechanical heart to see it like this. Where did his people go? How did this happen? He may never truly know what caused the end of the empire, and he acknowledges that now. But how is it that no one's attempted to rebuild? What's keeping them from rebuilding? His determination begins to grow. If no one else will do it, he will. The long walk to Heng has given him plenty of time to think. Now that he has a bit of information about the world, he's decided it's time to start formulating a plan of what to do. He knows that the skeletons are being repressed, that they've been pushed out. While on his quest to gather some information, he should also start gathering some supporters. He should begin recruiting. There has to be others out there like him, those that have some memory of the old empire, those that remember that skeletons are not to be pushed aside. As he approaches his burial site, he can't help but wonder why he was buried here, in the Great Desert. He doesn't remember anything of his past life, certainly nothing to do with a desert. Quinn had offered that perhaps he had been stationed somewhere and the building collapsed, But K4N3 had left out that he had been entombed in a small structure. It had not collapsed. It also seemed as though his powering down was deliberate, similar to his awakening. He's unsure of why. Perhaps his book has some clues. As of right now, though, he can't make sense of any of the notes. It's taken longer than expected, but his destination is finally in his sights. The town of Heng lies just on the horizon. He understands that he will likely not receive a warm welcome. He's just hoping that they're not hostile. He's unsure what the humans are like these days. His memories of them are very foggy, and he's hoping that his language core is still intact enough to speak to them. What kind of barbarians do not defeat the monsters just outside their gates? Are the humans of this world that pathetic that they can't deal with a sand skimmer outside their walls? Admittedly, he can't deal with them right now, but given some time he surely could. If there's a town here, they should be able to deal with them. Pathetic. Upon speaking with the guards, K4N3 quickly realizes that he's made a mistake. He's not at Heng. He's at Stoat. He's in the wrong town altogether. He's actually okay with it, as this gives him a chance to look around without having any biased opinions from the skeletons in the Black Desert City. This town is not that impressive. It seems quite small to him, but at least it's a settlement, and it seems to be thriving. More important is the fact that no one seems to care that he's a skeleton. That's not something he was expecting. Before heading into town, K4N3 decides to ask the guards a few questions. They seem annoyed that he's still talking to them, and they tell him to hurry up. They're not here to answer questions for peasants. K4N3 is a little bit unfamiliar with that term, but it seems as though the lower class don't seem to have an opinion here. Interesting. It gives him an internal clue that perhaps these aren't the people he wants to deal with. First impressions of the town leave him sick to his stomach. The buildings seem to have copied the old empire style of construction, but they're nothing compared to their grandeur. They feel more like shacks. Was this truly a town? It's time for K4N3 to explore the city and see what he can learn about the United City's citizens. He knows very little of this culture, and he's interested to see what they have to offer. One thing is immediately clear though, there seems to be a class difference, and he's not a fan of that. Whenever there's a class difference, there's usually oppression, and that's not something he can stand for. He had to admit, the townsfolk were pleasant enough, and no one seemed to be scared that a skeleton was walking around the town. There's a sheriff's office right near the town entrance, which is always a good thing to see. Law and order is always a good thing to have, and there even seems to be some prisoner cages near the center of town. Upon closer inspection, there's quite a few cells sitting out here. Perhaps they have a problem with crime, or perhaps this is a way of deterring criminals, knowing that you'll be paraded in front of the town like a circus act. The market stalls seem to be empty, but perhaps that's because there's so many buildings dedicated to trading posts. It's quite interesting seeing a shop for every individual type of item. He's used to the surplus stores that they had back in the old empire, but maybe with such a small town, or such a divided population, maybe it was required to have every different type of shop be a separate building. Either way, he finds it quite interesting. It's a culture he's never experienced before, and it tells him something about them. Unfortunately, his excitement was short-lived. In the distance, he sees something he was worried about from the beginning. A slave shop. He knew there had to be a dark side to this culture, to this town. Whenever there's a class system, there's always oppression. Those that are caught underfoot. He better get in and get out before he says something that'll get himself in trouble. And almost as if on cue, it seems he's witnessing some justice now. Someone was attacking a guard outside and he's being brought to jail now. Perhaps they do have a crime problem after all. It takes him a few minutes, but he gathers the courage to go inside. Noticing the shopkeeper right away, he decides to ignore her and checks on the slaves. All of these people are kept against their will, enslaved, hardly fed. No better than a rabid animal. People should not be treated like this. They're sentient after all. K4N3 has a short discussion with the shopkeeper, and it seems she doesn't really have much control over anything. She just works here. It seems slavery is common in the UC, something he takes note of. It seems K4N3 and the United Cities are probably not going to get along. It seems like the aristocracy here is just as bad. He decides to tail them for a little bit on his way out, just to kind of see what they do. Arrogant, as always. This is something he came to expect of a town like this. Once again, he takes note of the class system here. There's clearly a level of aristocracy and a level of peasant working class. The working class seem to be busy, going about their day, doing their work, while the aristocrats walk around with their bodyguards, taunting others. It's not something he enjoys seeing. It's something he's willing to fight against. Having gained all the information he needed to see on the United Cities, K4N3 decides to leave. He stops and asks for directions on the way out, and the guard is happy to point the direction to Hang. He needs to get his job done and be done with these people. They're not the type of people he wants to interact with, at least not yet. And that is going to do it for today, everybody. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you liked this episode, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.